Once upon a time, what you're looking at here was the old Roman road. It was part of the main artery that connected England east to west, and it intersected at the village just behind me, which pretty much connected north to south, or London down to the coast. That's Flo, by the way. She's joining us on today's amateur history and context video. So, this area we are currently in is Sussex. And Sussex, unlike the rest, or the vast majority of the rest of the British Isles, excluding Ireland, was domesticated or Romanised relatively quickly. We're talking within a couple of decades. Sussex already had all the signs of intense Romanification, if that's a word. Villas, under floor heating, hypercourse, all the usual exports, etc. This wasn't entirely unusual, because the tribes that obviously lived at the coast would have had some forms of merchant dealings with the tribes who were already here, with the extended Roman Empire. But even by that standard, it was a very fast domestication. And there is a reason behind this, because I was hoping to time this to the moment we come through this next set of gates, but there is another explanation as to why the Romification happened so quickly here. And that is, basically you're looking at this area being the first Silicon Valley. So back in Roman times, and if the weather had been slightly better, you'd be able to see the rolling hills, Sussex Downs. But nevertheless, it's actually probably quite similar to what it was like when the Romans were here a lot of the time. But what isn't today, these green fields intersected with trees, is the process of an awful lot of human-made agricultural change over the last 2,000 years. Because prior to that, this, back when the Romans were here, was one very big forest. A forest so big it stretched all the way from here to the outskirts of London. Now, we do know that 200 years prior to the invasion or the conquest of Britain, the Romans had faced the ignominious defeat in the Tuborg forest, and Romans, very much like the Borg, assimilate, and so they would be naturally not being set up militarily to fight in forests, and having had themselves broadly shamed, they would have been unwilling to fight in a forest, especially one as vast and impenetrable as the one that occupied every piece of land you see around here, stretching, as I said, 30 or so miles all the way into London. Which was a problem, because the forest also contained something the Romans really needed. Something that to which was what silicon is to the Silicon Valley was to the Roman Empire. And that was iron. Huge amounts and deposits of iron deep in the forests, already being mined to some extent and extracted by the local populace, but they knew where the iron was and the Romans knew how to extract it. So it is true to say, or it's fair to say, within decades, of course, the Romans knew if you can't conquer, you can buy people off, and so a symbiotic relationship occurred. The Romans gave everything that they had to the local tribes, who in return gave them access and also labour of extracting all of that iron. Now when you think about it, from everything from the gladiators to armour, to pots, to cutlery, to utensils, to tools of all kinds, to nails, so many nails, all of these were vital to the running of the empire, especially when they were conquering new territories, such as Britannia. So within a very few decades, this entire area had become incredibly cosmopolitan. Not only have you got troops from all over the empire, but also craftsmen, lawyers, ladies of negotiable affection, architects, engineers of all kinds of stripes, hydrologists, people who are capable of extracting metra, etc. And so for a good 200 years, this became the Silicon Valley. When you look at it today, how peaceful, how incredibly rural it's returned to, it's really difficult to picture that this was once an incredibly hustling centre of activity, probably one of the busiest in the known world when it came to new technologies, etc. And yet today, it has returned to being the epitome of bucolic. So I talk about this in relation to how we deal with AI today. Hence my ideas around cognology. You can imagine this might give you a small flavour of what life might have been like being a Roman centurion on patrol in these deep dark forests. But how this leads to my connected topic of the cognologies, language, writing, printing press, and now AI, is that it was writing which formed another absolute backbone of the Roman Empire and all of those empires. So if you put it in the context of each of the cognologies, you have the evolution of language, where humans begin to live in groups that extend beyond the immediate family, the very first extended family, proto-tribes or clans, because suddenly you can share information and you can share novelty and surprise and innovation. And that cognitive leap proves so enormous that over time it coalesces, it continues to be refined until you get to the next big cognitive leap, roughly 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, with the invention of writing around Mesopotamia. But you notice from there, that kicks off the age of the ancient empires, the Greeks, the Romans, India, all of them. But all of it only capable, or only made possible by the administration cohesiveness that comes with writing and the ability to keep systemic records, and for information to now be able to persist over time, and for information to be able to travel and to have a degree of permanence. Whereas with language, you're relying on an oral tradition. Is that incredibly significant for the growth of cognition? Yeah. If you read the Iliad or Ulysses, Theseus, you will note that not a single character, be it god or mortal, has any inner dialogue. There is no inner thought processes. There is no characters thinking anything beyond what is described outwardly by Homer, because it was an oral tradition. There was no concept of there being an inner life. Only with the invention of writing does it become possible, or does it even become feasible, to explore thoughts and thought processes. So you have the expansion of empire, which is the expansion of physical power of human beings, but at the same time you're having a massive expansion of cognitive power. Human beings are massively expanding their cognitive abilities. And of course the next one after that is eventually, thanks to our friend Johannes Gutenberg, and yes, I know, print was invented, forms of it in China. Unfortunately, it was born into a very rigid system. Also, the Chinese language is many things. It's very beautiful, but it is not bereft of characters. And this becomes extremely bureaucratic for fixed print. But here's something most people don't. Flo, wait. You have a bramble. Go on. You're brambled up. Walk on. I'm catching it. Excellent. Good girl. Go on. Over you go. Come on. You can do it. No? Okay. Running out of battery. We're going to have to switch. Okay. Yeah, run on. Good girl. Might be a little bit shaky. Can do what I can. Popular misconception, not even a misconception, it's just a popular conception, is that Johannes Gutenberg may have invented the printing press out of the kindness of his own heart, out of a wish to benefit all of mankind and allow us the great boon and joy of reading and writing. I'm afraid nothing could be further from the truth. Johannes Gutenberg was basically running a startup. His first idea, so this was a world of and relics and praying to relics and the Holy Cross and bones and all those kind of things. And the first thing was when they used to hold these relics aloft on special feast days, people would attend and they would believe that if they caught sight or if they were in the perimeter of these holy relics, they would in some of their power. So he came up with the idea of producing little mirrors that people could hold up, little brass mirrors that people could hold up, and they could reflect the power of these holy relics onto them. So he's a meditative chap. But there was an issue even bigger that needed sorted out, which he spotted the opportunity. Johannes Gutenberg came from Mainz, which is a German town in what was then the Holy Roman Empire. Now, I urge you, maybe I'll try and flash up a map of the Holy Roman Empire, but honestly, once you see it, it's never forgotten. You have never seen a more complex It's like one of those jigsaw puzzles that you find in somewhere you're staying, like an Airbnb, or if you go to your grand's and you just look at the picture on the bottom and you're like, I'm going to make that. Well, that's pretty much what the Holy Roman Empire was, an entire jigsaw of tiny little independent states, each having their own ruler, each having their own rules, each having their own way of doing things. And of course they were still under the being an empire, hence Holy Roman. Wasn't very holy, wasn't very Roman, and wasn't much of an empire, as they say. But still, empires need paperwork and administration, bureaucracy, all those different places trading with one another, each with their own rules. There has to be an awful lot for the lawyers and the scribes to do. But all of it had to be handwritten, which was a nightmare. It's bad enough the bureaucracies we have now. Imagine where every single piece of paper had to be handwritten first. Every document, every form had to be handwritten, and had to be handwritten by the very few people who were actually literate. This was why Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press, to cash in on the massive reduction in bureaucracy that such a device would bring, and the riches that would come with it. It was a Microsoft Office of its time, and that was why all those amazing things that came about as a byproduct of the printing press, the Reformation, the Renaissance, good gal, international standards of weights and measures, scientific method, eventually the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment, all of these things came about as a byproduct of the printing press. A sort of a boon that came out of it, not through deliberation or intent. Now you can look at it another way. You can look at it and say that if you look at the total information space, so very quick recap. We consider information in the Claude Shannon sense. Claude Shannon's information theory, basically information can be defined as surprise, novelty, unexpectedness, something that wasn't supposed to be there. If I say to you 111 occurring, this is a very low information content message. If I say to you, bloody hell, look over in that vine there, aliens have just landed. That has a lot of information in it, a lot of unexpectedness and a lot of surprise. So that's how we define info. One very good way of defining information. So each of those cognologies, language, writing, print, and now AI, give us massive amounts of access to new parts and new realms of the total information space, that total space to which you can find surprise, unexpectedness, novelty, and innovation. So it could be said, if you look at language, and then we invent writing, and then we invent the printing press, and now we've invented AI, that what happens is we exhaust the current total information space. And that may explain, could be, why textual analysis became such a thing before we invented AI. Why there is so much remakes and not much novelty in terms of books, films. Why there hasn't been any new genre, really, of absolute definable fashions, for the last 20 years, 20, 30 years. We've exhausted the total information space. We have saturated it. And when that happens, the banks burst and water will find a way. Maybe information has the same way that something has to come along. It isn't necessarily designed to be the thing, but information we latch onto, this work, as a new cognology, and we're off to the races. Certainly happened with the printing press, seems to have happened with writing, seems to be happening with AI. Just once more to reiterate, if you're a Roman, at one point all this was trees. But there is a big difference between the other three cognologies and the one we're going through at the moment. Nobody knew with the other ones they were happening, and maybe someone as clever as Socrates or maybe Montaigne or somebody in the age of print were aware of just how big things were about to become, how much change was going to happen with this new access to this new cognology, giving us new forms of cognitive powers, new access to the total information space. But the vast majority, a lot of planning going on, was there? In fact, the recognition that print was the thing that was fueling the Reformation and the Renaissance seems to have passed most people by. Now, this may be because, of the 8 million books first published in the 50 years after the printing press, there was an awful lot of them were very low information content. what would today be called AI slop. Astrological books, books on useless herbal things, boring religious tracts, self-aggrandizing nonsense, terrible plays, all that stuff. It's all happened before, just now we call it AI slop. But they did not have an overarching sense that it was occurring. But we do. We recognise that we're in the midst of cognology. It allows us, well, as Terry Pratchett used to say, bless him, as the late great Terry Pratchett used to say, if you wish to defeat the monster, you first have to say its name. And I think that gives us an explanation, or at least some insight, into half of our issues around AI. That just in the same way that those who are undergoing all of the tumult printing press are going through the same kind of tumult today when it comes to AI, because we haven't said the monster's name. We haven't recognised that we're going through a new cognology. And if you look at the way the world changed so emphatically in the last cognology, there is absolutely nothing, no evidence being presented whatsoever that we won't be undergoing exactly the same thing again. Which is why I set up the Cognology channel, which is why I do videos like this, in order to get people just to see the reality tunnel of us being in the midst of a new cognology. Once again, for the non-Roman ears, all this used to be trees. No! Good girl. Come on, come here. I think the world is rightfully bored of listening to me waffle on. I knew you are. Say goodbye, folks.